Today I'm going to convert the new Tyranid Psychophage from this to this. Don't you dare come near my babies. And it's coming right up. Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, today I am converting the Psychophage from the Leviathan, I cannot say that word, box set. Now previously I've converted the Screamer Killer Carnifex and I was really happy how that came out. However, today I think it's going to be a little harder because we're going to convert the Psychophage. Now of course I've already built one of these single posed miniatures as per the instruction book. So I had a look at this miniature and thought, how the hell am I going to convert it? It looks really difficult. However, before we do this task, of course, we've got to clip all of the pieces off of the sprue and clean up all of the mould lines. Now, to be fair, there aren't many pieces. We've got obviously the legs or arms, we've got two body pieces, and basically the tongue that goes in between. So I got the original model again and I had a close look at it. Of course, this model has its rear end in the air, so I thought maybe I could sort of try and do something different, maybe have it on the floor more. I thought about maybe cutting the body and then sort of reposing it in the middle section, but well, there's a lot of detail there and I thought it would be really difficult to do. So I thought, well, maybe I could not cut it and just tilt the body backwards, maybe try to reposition some of the legs. I might have to glue the back piece onto some rocks or something to give it some stability. I wasn't quite sure about that, but I thought that would be a good place to start. Now, to make these miniatures look different from each other, and because I don't particularly like it, I thought that the smoke coming out of the top of the vents might be a good place to start to make this miniature look different. Maybe just take them off. I mean, the pose itself might lend better to not having those vents there. The original pose, clearly he's attacking with this smoke that's coming out of it, but I thought in this new pose, well, he wouldn't be attacking with it, so I decided to remove it. So looking at the smoke, it's only attached to one half of the miniature. I was slightly concerned that when I cut this off it was going to be hollow in the middle of those vents. If it is, then obviously I'm going to have to fill it with some green stuff. But I wasn't quite sure until I started cutting. However, when I did start to cut, luckily that wasn't hollow in the middle. So all I had to do was cut them off with my clippers, just carefully turning the miniature from one side to the other to make sure that I don't cut into the actual vent itself. And then when that was done, I just used my knife just to clean up the plastic, and then I used my file just to file everything down and make it all smooth. So with those pieces off, I thought it was looking pretty good. As I said, we've got the tongue to go in there still. Then I started looking at the tentacles, because the tentacles have certain things that it's holding. One of them is an arm and the other one is a pipe. So I thought, first of all, I need to cut the pipe off because I'm not going to have this joined to the base, so we need to remove that section. Now once I'd done this, I was thinking about the possibility of cutting these two tentacles off that are holding things and maybe switch them from one side to the other, put them in different places. It's going to be really difficult just to cut out the arm and leave the tentacle in its place, so I thought this could be a good alternative. So I got some blue tack and I put it on the top of a paint pot. This helps soften the cut as I cut into the plastic. I worked out exactly where I wanted to cut, and then I got my knife and I just gently cut the tentacle off at the same thickness as the other tentacle. The idea was to be able to switch these over, glue them into their new position, hopefully not to have to do too much more work. So I cut both of those tentacles off and then I dry fitted them into position and they were looking pretty good. The great thing about rotating these round is the tentacles sort of are angled in a totally different position, so they're going to look really different. So I got my plastic glue and I put some glue on either side of the tentacles, put them into place and just let them bond. Okay, so next it's the tongue. I wanted the tongue to be in a different position, again just to make the model just look a little bit different. Now the tongue of course is fixed into position, so I'd have to do some trimming. I cut the little bottom section off, made that shorter. The idea was to have the tongue in a lower position. So I cut that little stem off, and then I got my knife and I trimmed up some of the plastic in hope that when I pushed it together, the tongue would be in a lower position. Okay, so I've got the tentacles on there, they're all drying. Before I push these together and glue them together, I'm going to work on the legs. Now, the first thing I need to do is remove all of the terrain that's on the legs, because of course these legs are going to be in a totally different position. Most of them aren't going to be touching the floor. So I worked out which ones had pieces of terrain on. There weren't too many, I think 4 in total. And then I started cutting away at the terrain. Again, I used my blue tack trick with my knife. The claw, which is embedded in the terrain, I actually had to cut downwards towards the piece of terrain. The idea was to make the terrain itself become the bottom of the claw. So I'd have to leave some of the terrain at the bottom and then just reshape it using the piece of terrain that's on the claw. That's a really useful tip, because if you just cut it off at the top of the terrain, you'll actually have the bottom of the claw missing and it might just look a little odd. So I just used my clippers and cut off as much of the terrain as I could, and then of course I used my knife and just tidied them all up. Okay, so back to the body. I've now glued it together. When I first glued it together, the tongue popped back into its normal position. I hadn't cut out enough plastic, so I had to undo it, cut some more plastic away, and then glue it back into position. And what I've done is I've put some blue tack in just to put some pressure on that tongue to make sure that it stays in the down position. I put a load of glue at the bottom, and then I put the blue tack in, pushed it down, and then just left it to fully dry before I removed the blue tack, and then hopefully the tongue will just stay in that downward position. Okay, so that's all dried. I took the blue tack out and the tongue is in a downward position. It's certainly lower than the original, so I get a slightly different pose to that mouth opening, and of course with the tentacles in different positions, it's all starting to look a bit different. I then looked at the legs. Now, my original idea was to move the position of these legs a little bit like I did on the Screamer Killer Carnifex. However, what I did is I put the legs into their natural position just to see what it would look like. And to my surprise, it looks fantastic with the legs in the same position as it was originally. Mainly because the terrain had been removed and now the model was sitting in a totally different pose. Now, of course, the main problem is going to be gluing the model to the base. So I thought, well, I could maybe have him sitting on a rock or something. I had a look in my bits box and I found these Tyranid little hives. I'm not quite sure what they're called. I'm going to call them nests. So I thought maybe I could have it glued to this nest to sort of help it be a bit more steady on the base. However, it didn't quite sit properly and it didn't look that great. So I thought the better pose would be if this nest is underneath the creature, because it does have this sort of screaming pose about it. And in my head, the Psychophage was saying, "Don't you dare come near my nest, near my babies." So I'd have to come up with another solution for gluing the miniature to the base. So what I did is I used my experience of gluing miniatures like this to a base where there isn't that much sticking point, and I made up some green stuff. Now, green stuff, if you don't know, is an epoxy. It's blue and yellow, and the idea is you mix it together until it goes green, and then you can work with it a little bit like clay, and then about 3 or 4 hours later it dries rock hard. So I mixed this green stuff together, and this is where I made a bit of a mistake, a bit of a rookie error actually. I can't believe I did it, but I did. What I normally do is I put away some of the yellow and I put away some of the blue and make 2 balls rather than cutting the whole thing off where they're already joined as they come, because what I find happens is in that join section you get some hard bits where they've already sort of moulded together. However, for whatever reason, I didn't make 2 separate balls. I just got a big lump of it and then I just sort of squeezed it all together. When I first started moulding with it, I thought it was okay, but as I spread the green stuff out, I realised I hadn't mixed it properly, or some of it was already hard. It's not a problem. but it just doesn't look that great, that's all. But it'll be fine once it's all finished. So this is how we're going to do it. We are going to make some blobs of this green stuff, and we're going to place it on the base where we're going to glue the miniature. The idea is we are going to make an indentation into this green stuff where the 3 joins are, and this will give us more gluing area to glue the miniature on. Now obviously we don't want just blobs of green stuff on the base, so what we're going to do is we're going to use some water and our finger, and we're going to spread this green stuff out on the edges. The idea is to have a raised area to push the miniature in, and then spread out into a flat area on the rest of the base. In that way, when we glue our sand on the top, you're not going to be able to see this green stuff. It's just going to look a little bit like an uneven area of ground. So that's what I did, and as I said, as I spread this out, I realised that the green stuff wasn't mixed particularly well, and I had these like hard yellow sections. I just flattened it down as much as I could and just made it as smooth and flat as I could, apart from the areas where we're going to embed the miniature. Now I also filled in the little holes that of course I'm not going to be using anymore for this miniature to sort of stand on the base. So I filled in the little holes, and then I was ready to make these indentations. So what I did is I covered the green stuff with water because we don't want the miniature to stick onto the green stuff, and then I positioned it where I wanted it onto the base, and then I pushed it into position into the green stuff. Took the miniature away, and then I had my indentations, and like I say, when it comes to gluing this miniature on after painting, I'll just put some super glue into those indentations and then glue the miniature on, and he will fix really well. Now I noticed that one of the nests had an area where I think something else was supposed to be on there, so I basically had a hole. So I filled that with green stuff, and then I went to the piece of terrain that I'd cut off at the beginning where we had some little spikes, and then I cut and glued one of those spikes into the green stuff just to make it look like it's all one piece. And that's it, all finished. I couldn't bear the thought of really horrible green stuff, so I actually primed the base black just to make it look nicer, and there he is, all done. I'm really happy with this conversion. I think I've got a really cool pose. I actually like this pose more than the original, and he definitely looks different from the original. But let me know what you think of my conversion in the comments box below. Now if you want to see my Screamer Killer Carnifex conversion, here is that for you to watch, and here is my Tyranid magnetizing tutorial videos, and here are my Necron Indomitus conversions, which you may also enjoy watching.